Hi, my name is Gretchen Hyde. I'm the director for the Idaho Rangeland Resources Commission, and I'd like to welcome you to the IROAM trailer, Idaho Rangeland Outdoor Adventure Mobile. This trailer was designed to bring an outdoor experience to your classroom. Rangelands are over half of Idaho, and they are in everybody's backyard. Understanding the ecosystem where we live is very important. Understanding how we manage it is even more important. Understanding some of the different issues is part of what we're trying to create an opportunity for students to learn. And the first thing we start with is a wire gate. These things are, in a lot of people's minds, an obstacle, but this is a really critical management tool for livestock on rangeland. Rangeland comprises over half of Idaho, and these 20 million acres require management. This is probably one of the most important tools of keeping livestock in the proper pastures. Livestock can be a really beneficial use of rangelands with proper management. And so having closed gates, open gates, and fences intact are really important. This gate is a very simple system that was set up, almost 100 years ago, that you could use, that anybody can open and close. So the key here is, this is called a cheater bar. So if it's too tight, which this one's not, you can use this bar to help leverage and open up the gate. So this gate, you just start with the top, push in, and pull out the bottom. So it's a pretty simple system. And then if you need to use the cheater bar, which is a lot of times if people are not quite, don't have strong enough arms or hands, they can use this to tie it in and pull the gate open. So opening and closing gates is part of the responsibility of rangeland users. And this is something that we really want everybody to understand and be a very good part of being the steward of rangeland. So as we enter the trailer, there is a starting point, and we start on this side of the trailer where we're talking about basically the early spring. So when cattle and livestock, they normally, and this isn't always, start on home places, on their home property, on the ranch. And so this is a lot of times private property. And that's where they calve their cattle and they kind of go through the winter. So as we proceed through the year, you can see in here there's a lot of wildlife, there's a lot of interaction. Private lands, which are only 20% of rangeland, are really critical to the connection of rangeland throughout the year. A lot of times that is where the water. When the settlers came, that's what they looked for, is water, and so that's where the private land is. So when you start in the winter, as the calves get big enough, they migrate up and through the spring. And on this side you'll see it's a lot greener. Everything's greening up. There's definitely a lot more precipitation. This kind of describes there's a lot of multiple use. Rangelands, especially the public land, are about multiple use. And multiple use can include both recreation and livestock grazing on rangeland. I'd like to introduce you to Sage. So Sage is our mascot for the trailer. And Sage is kind of telling the story. We have a booklet called Roaming with Sage that helps kind of guide the students through the experience. So Sage is saying, I am Sage, let's roam together. My cows and sheep graze on grasses. Elk and mule deer will too. Coyotes hunt rabbits, birds and ground squirrels. Sage grouse eat sagebrush, wildflowers and insects. So the interaction of all the different animals that live on rangeland is a big part of what we're trying to explain with this trailer. So one of the things that's really highlighted in this trailer is understanding where you live. And so as you look at these maps, there are, the kids are supposed to identify where they live. They know their county, they usually have an idea, but then also understand what the land cover is in their area. In southern Idaho, a majority of the land is rangeland, and that has very tight connections with the precipitation zones. So I'm here in Eagle, Idaho, and you're going to have basically a zone of 9 to 12 inches of annual rainfall. That includes the winter precipitation. And every year it's different, and that's part of what we're trying to describe. So we have these spinners, which are designed to help explain the annual variations. And so each student would have their own experience. So they would each record the data of where they live and then what their winter precipitation, or for each season. So every season there's a spinner that goes with that. So it kind of gives a little bit of understanding of how each year it's different, and you may get 4 inches one year and you may get 6 inches another. As we go along the counter, we talk a little bit about the rangeland plants. And below the counter, it talks about the roots. The roots are really an important part of carbon sequestration, as well as just where the moisture is obtained. So understanding the length or the depth of the different kinds of plants really helps explain some of the issues with rangeland. What's below the surface is really important. So biodiversity is also a part of this activity. Kind of looking at the walls, you can see there's different plants and animals identified, as well as just insects that are beneficial to things like sage grouse. The ranchers a lot of times are providing water out on rangeland. So on public land, typically BLM land, there's not a lot of water. When the settlers came, they picked the good spots that had water. Pretty much at that point, BLM was kind of what was left. The Bureau of Land Management lands were what was left over and did not have water. So water is being provided and maintained by ranchers all over. And this also directly benefits the wildlife species, whether it's birds or pronghorn or deer. There's all kinds of beneficial uses of the stock water that is provided for cattle. One of the funny things we put in the trailer, this is actually a cow pie. And the cow pie is something that people see but they don't understand. It's really a great source of fertilizer. It's also kind of becomes a microclimate that underneath it will have baby plants and animals that are beneficial. So it is kind of one of the ways that we recycle and benefit the land. So manure is something that is a byproduct, but it is also beneficial to the plants and animals in the area. Sage grouse, in particular, when they have chicks, they utilize a lot of the insects that are living underneath the manure piles. So as we proceed through the year, once again, we have a spring precipitation and then summer. And we all know in Idaho, in southern Idaho, it is pretty dry typically. And we may get, as much as 3 inches, but very rarely. 2020 is a year that we can say is another exception. But as the livestock move up into the higher country, which is typically what happens, they kind of follow the green is what we call it. They get into higher country where it's not quite as hot and there's more water availability. It benefits kind of the lower country by allowing that to rest. But one of the big problems in Idaho rangeland is wildfire. We've gone from, we've had some pretty significant, almost, 250,000 acres of wildfire that can happen in just a couple days. And it's really devastating to both the animals and the plants. And that's part of the story here. Sadly, most of the wildfires in Idaho are caused by humans. And when you look at the wildfire map here, you can see a lot of it's right along the I-84 corridor, which is our freeway. People, whether it's dragging chains, it's not intentional, but people tend to have things that cause fire. And along the roadsides, there's typically very flammable vegetation, which is something that they're really working on. So one of the other spinners is looking at whether or not you get a wildfire every year. There's times that you don't get a fire, there's times that you get a natural lightning caused fire, and then there's many other sources of wildfire or that human caused fire. Part of the explanation on wildfire is talking about the fire triangle. This fire triangle kind of explains how we have to manage for wildfires and be preventative. There are 3 things that are essential to have a fire, to start a fire: oxygen, heat, and fuel. And fuel on rangeland is basically fine fuels and plants. So plants, once they get dried out, especially cheatgrass, and this is where cheatgrass becomes a huge issue, is it dries out really early in the year and becomes just basically fuel for the rest of the season. And unless it's edible, which is in the spring by livestock, it really can accumulate and cause a lot of problems. So wildfire is part of this story. Sadly, it's a lot of stories throughout the state of Idaho, and many people have dealt with it. As you look close on this, you'll see ground squirrels, we'll see pygmy rabbits. There's a lot of animals that are impacted by wildfire. And so mitigating that or minimizing that impact or making them controllable by firefighters is really important. If they have long, tall grass, then they have out of control fires really fast. As we move through the wildfire season, which tends to be in July and August in Idaho, these areas are burned and then they have to have some recovery time. If there is not a good source of plant seeds out on there has to be rehabilitation. And so there's a lot of activities that have to happen to make that, to allow that area to recover and not just become a monoculture, which is a term that we put in here, a monoculture of cheatgrass. Cheatgrass, while it's edible, it's actually pretty nutritious for animals. It becomes very, very bad. And Sage talks a little bit about that in the book. People, animals, everything don't like cheatgrass because it does have so many negative things that they carry in your socks, they get in dogs' ears and feet, and then they cause wildfire. So once again, this changes what's below the surface, and the shallow roots of cheatgrass are not beneficial to holding the soil as well as creating that good nutrient cycle. So it really does change the chemistry in the soils. So as we're coming back through the fall, the livestock are making their way back to the ranch and back to the home country, where the calves are weaned and the cows are shipped home. And that's part of the story. Every year, this is their crop, and utilizing the natural grasses that are on rangeland that are not really beneficial in terms of human use for any other way. We're not competing with the wildlife, but it's something that we can come back and we actually get a great product. So local meat, local beef is really a big part of what's Idaho's economy, as well as we all love to have that. So the fall, we also have precipitation, which is usually pretty low, but that actually can help carry over vegetation to the next year. One of the other things that I think students need to think about early is opportunities to work in Idaho and work on natural resources. Rangelands provide a lot of different kinds of jobs. And right now, students from the University of Idaho who have a rangeland science degree have the job opportunities to take 8 to 10 different jobs. So there's 8 to 10 jobs for every one graduate. That is a lot of great jobs. And here are some examples: working on a ranch, working on fire rehabilitation and firefighting, working on streams and restoration efforts that benefit both wildlife and livestock, working with animals, and then just understanding the whole complex issues and working through the different agencies. So it's really a good opportunity, and it's something to think about for your students. If they love the outdoors, if they love to hunt and fish and recreate, this is a great career for them to go into. So as you go through this booklet, it's just basically taking you through this trailer and the counter information. I'd encourage you to take some time, go through it, and see how the students can learn a little bit about rangeland, as well as kind of experience what is happening in their backyard. Every community in the state nearly is surrounded by rangeland, and it's something that we should know where we live and understand how these lands are managed. So another thing that we have to remind everyone, that rangelands are both workplaces and playgrounds. We have a lot of people who enjoy ATVing, hunting, fishing, hiking, biking, and there's some responsibility. We all have to take a part of it to make sure that the rangeland is healthy and is accessible for everybody in the future. So I encourage you to contact the Idaho Rangeland Resource Commission or contact me, and let's try and get this on your schedule, and I look forward to taking this to your students and you having an opportunity to see it in person.